Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's DWF Live. My name is Jared Visitor, and I'll be your host today. I'm an education student at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. My mother is Ojibwa, and my father is Cree, and Chanie Wenjack was my great-uncle. If you're not familiar with the story, my great-uncle Chanie died escaping residential school in 1966 when he was just 12 years old. After hearing of his story, Gord Downie, the lead singer of the Tragically Hip, was inspired to write 10 poems, which became the Secret Path Project. Inspired by Chanie's story and Gord's call to build a better Canada, the Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund aims to build cultural understanding and create a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As we gather throughout Turtle Island, we remind you that we are situated on treaty and unceded Indigenous lands. This land is steeped in rich Indigenous history, and it's home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples today. And as a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. I'm calling in today from Thunder Bay, which is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Ojibwa of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. We'll begin today's session with an introduction of our special guest. We'll have a chat, which will include some of my own questions and some questions we gathered in advance from the audience. The Honourable Murray Sinclair is a former Senator of Canada. He served as Manitoba's first and Canada's second Indigenous judge. From 2009 to 2015, he oversaw the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where he heard the testimonies of more than 7,000 residential school survivors, many of whom have shared their stories for the very first time. The 94 calls to action that came from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report are widely recognized as providing the path towards reconciliation in Canada. Welcome, Senator Sinclair. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and welcome to all of your attendees and your guests. I appreciate the fact that you've invited me to be part of this important conversation.
You betcha. So I wanted to start off by saying what an honor it is to have you to join us with this conversation. First of all, how are you? And where are you calling us from?
Well, I'm quite fine, thank you. I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and just having moved into a new apartment about a month ago. But it's very warm here. The weather's improved. We're not expecting any snow, but you never know with weather at this time of year, what it's going to do.
Especially this year, yep. Wow. So to begin, there's a lot of discussion and conversations today around what reconciliation is. It seems to be such a prominent part of our discussions, but we often have a hard time defining it. People are always asking me, what does it mean to you? What is reconciliation? So I think to begin, we'd like to ask you, what does reconciliation mean to you?
Well, at bottom, the issue of reconciliation centers on the issue of respect. So it's about respect. It's about mutual respect. And in order for us to have mutual respect, we have to be able to understand each other's history, each other's culture, each other's differences from our way of doing things. And so we need to gather all of that information together and continue to have respect. And what I've said is that the importance of reconciliation is for us to be able to talk to and about each other in a more respectful manner. But there is one aspect of reconciliation that we didn't pay enough attention to in the Truth and Reconciliation report, and which is proven to be an ongoing challenge for Indigenous nations and communities, and that is that before we can have mutual respect, Indigenous people need to be able to gain back their self-respect, because the Canadian society for a long time has spent so much time oppressing Indigenous people, denying them their sense of self, denying them their truth about themselves, that many Indigenous people have come to believe it. And so those who believe what the colonial authorities have been telling us for many, many years, many generations, are kind of facing off against those who want to be able to learn their unique cultures, their unique history. And sometimes they find resistance from some of their own leaders. So we have that issue of self-respect that we're also beginning to recognize as an important part of reconciliation.
Yes, that it kind of reminds me of the 4 questions that you posed to youth at the Heart of the Treaty 6 event was, where do I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? And who am I? Those are the important questions that we need to be able to answer as Indigenous people to really understand what direction we're going and what journey, and to put one foot in front of the other. We kind of need to have that connection within ourselves.
Right. Those 4 questions are an important part of the conversation about reconciliation. Each child growing up needs to be able to answer that question for themselves. Where do I come from is about understanding the history of your ancestors and what were they like? What did they believe? What are their myths? What are their stories they told about each other? And because those are your stories, and they have an influence upon how you see yourself. And the answer, the question to where am I going, is about the hereafter. As you're leaving this world and going to the next level, or the creator's side, how do you get there? And what is it that has to be done in order for you to be able to get there? So, and that's an important part of culture. What is it that you need to be able to show to others around you, and also to yourself and to the spirit world, that you have truly learned what your history is? And of course, the question of why am I here is about purpose. It's about understanding the role of your own spirit. As Anishinaabe people, we have a teaching about the importance of that spirit. And when we ask elders to be able to find us our spirit name, they're not going out there to invent a name for us. They shouldn't be seeing it that way. And those who say that they've invented this name, or they've created this name for you, or don't really understand the teaching. The teaching is that when you are created, a spirit is placed within your body to join your body and your mind, so that your body, mind, and spirit become one. And that spirit, when it's placed within you, already has a name and already has a purpose. And that purpose becomes your purpose. And so when you know that, then it's about understanding why you decide things in a certain way, why you think about things in a certain way, and why you want to move and should move in a particular direction. So my spirit name is Mzenegijik. Mzenegijik literally means pictures in the sky, but there's a long story about it, and it's about a young man who goes out on the hills to set aside his food and his water, fast for his people, and talk to the Creator, because he wants the Creator to help him to help his people. And as he's talking to the Creator, nobody's talking back to him. And so he becomes very angry and starts stamping his feet. And a little vole pops up out of the ground and says, "Hey, brother, what are you doing?" And this young man says, I'm talking to the Creator, but he's not talking back to me. Yeah, he's not answering my questions. And the vowel in the language says, you're a stupid man because, well, you're already getting your answers. Just look at those things that are in the sky. Look at the way the clouds are moving, and look at the way the clouds are forming, and look at the shape of the clouds. Look at the way the birds are flying, and look at the things that are up there at nighttime and in the daytime. Those are your answers. Understanding all of creation and how creation works together is what your name means, what your purpose is. So when he comes back, he starts using that knowledge to help his people. And so that's my name. And so I use that knowledge to help the people. And it translates better as the one who speaks the pictures in the sky. And so I am Mizanagijik. So when I say I'm Mizanagijik, I'm not telling you that I created that name or somebody created that name for me. I'm telling you that that's the name that the Creator gave me when he sent the Spirit down to me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story and that teaching. That's it's very beautiful.
Thank you. And it's your teaching too. You have a similar teaching for your name. And if you haven't found your name yet, if your spirit name has not yet been located for you, then you should find out what it is, because that will help you define your purpose.
Wow.
Why you are here.
Yeah,
All of us.
I've been thinking about these questions a lot in my own journey in education as well. And, I was given a name right the first day when I was brought home. My great grandmother came and brought over all the family, and it was a surprise. Nobody told them that they were coming, but they gave me the name Giseseyab, which means rainbow. But I'm still at my journey of finding the story of that name, because I have the name, but I need to get the story to get the meaning of it. So I'm on my journey.
When you said that name, your name means more than just about a rainbow. Your name is about how those colors are all standing out, yet they're merged into one, and they join into one. And so those 7 colors, and it's important to know that there's 7 of them, that they're working together to form one. And so your name is about helping people of different experiences, different backgrounds, different colors, be able to work together as one. So you are a person who helps cultures and societies and people come together. That's what your name means, as I understand it.
Wow, that means a lot, and I really can't describe to you the gravity of the lesson that you just gave me. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. That yes, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So we've been gathering questions from our social media followers, partners, and educators. So let's jump right in.
Sure.
Over the last few years, we've seen some positive steps on the path towards reconciliation, but we know that there's a long way to go. We received a number of questions from businesses, schools, on the progress of reconciliation in Canada so far. The first one comes from Lisa Patterson at Group Health in Surrey, BC. Okay. What are your thoughts on the progress or lack thereof of reconciliation in Canada? And what are the most important things you would like to see done over the next 5 years?
Well, when we disclosed the contents of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I said to everybody, you have to understand that it will take us a long time to achieve reconciliation. It took us 11 generations to do the damage that has been done to Indigenous people and to the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and the institutions of society and Indigenous people. And so it's going to take us perhaps a similarly long time to be able to repair that and put things back into a better situation. It's not something that we can immediately fix or even in the short term fix. We can begin to address it. But when you think about how they went about destroying our culture and destroying our sense of self, they didn't succeed at the beginning. There were many Indigenous people who, they would go to school and they would hear what the school said, and they would go home and they would continue to live as they had always lived and continue to follow their culture and their teachings and speak their language. But it took them years upon years upon years of attack in order to be able to achieve that final result, which we face now, which is many people in our generation don't know their culture, don't know their language, and feel lost. And so as a result, we need to understand that reconciliation does not have a timeline other than continuing forward. But what reconciliation calls for is an understanding of where it is that you want to go, what it is you think you want to achieve, and constant effort to work to achieve it. So it requires a bit of planning. I had numerous conversations with the Prime Minister of Canada about reconciliation, and what I told him directly was that the government of Canada was suffering from lack of success in the area of reconciliation. I said, because you don't have a plan. You need a plan in order to know when you've done something right for a while, and then you do the next thing after that. You do the next thing after that. You do the next thing after that. So it's going to take a while for us to achieve reconciliation. So over a period, and don't forget now, we released the report of the TRC in 2015, and that's almost 10 years ago. From an institutional perspective, we've seen some changes, but not the kind of change that you might have expected or some people thought should be in place by now. But we still can do a lot of things effectively by changing the way we think about things. And so the question really is, if we want to achieve reconciliation, have we yet changed people's minds?
Wow. Yes, it's a very important part of it, because if we don't change our own minds, or if we're not aware of our own hearts, then we can't really connect, honestly and mutually with somebody else. So I think it's very important. Reconciliation at the individual level of reconnecting with your heart again, knowing where that is, being aware of it, how to speak about it and speak to it, and how to listen to it.
And being determined, because you're going to see people who deny, for example, the validity of the stories of the survivors and deny the purpose of reconciliation, or deny the idea of reconciliation. Those deniers are going to be quite influential for the next little while. And we need to understand that, but we need to never give up the fight to convince them, because the people who are alive today may get away with that, but it's their children who we have to work to change.
Right. That's deniers. That's a very often a very dangerous arena to step in, because as soon as you give them some space, that creates air, and then that fuels the fire, and then the discussion gets bigger and bigger. But that plays really well into our next question. And it's a video submission from Ben Roswell from the Circle for Democratic Solidarity.
I'm Ben Rosewell from the Circle for Democratic Solidarity, and I'm concerned about the rising trend in denialism, about the harms in social done by residential schools. I know you've called it the single greatest threat to reconciliation. There may or may not be some future criminalization of this behavior. If not, it certainly falls to us in non-Indigenous communities to counter this. And I wonder if you have any practical suggestions on how we can do that in a way that doesn't necessarily just lead to endless debates, but actually changes hearts. Thank you.
Well, the greatest threat to reconciliation is if people stop. If people just stop trying. You cannot stop trying. And so sometimes I see, young in Indigenous leaders work hard to try to change an institution or change the media or change a group in society, and they don't succeed, and then they just give up and they go live in the bush by themselves, or they go, about their business as if they've got no more obligation to do anything. You can't do that because reconciliation requires hard work, and it's hard work on the part of every one of us. And so once you've made the commitment and understand what you want to achieve, then you must continue to do that. There will never be a point, I don't think, where reconciliation itself per se will be criminalized, or anything that done in the name of reconciliation will be denied by the law. But there will be a period of time when the courts themselves struggle with the idea of reconciliation and understanding what their role is as courts in achieving reconciliation, because they don't know yet. They see themselves as representatives of the Queen. They see themselves as individuals who have an obligation to a concept which they call the law. They think the law is what is written in the books, but the law is about how we conduct our relationship as human beings. And that's what reconciliation is about, the way that we treat each other as human beings.
Wow. Yeah, you made a comment about, the judicial system's role in reconciliation. And I wonder what you think about corporate Canada's role in reconciliation, because we've had many questions from partners of Chanie Wenjack Fund and about the calls to action number 92 specifically relating to business and reconciliation. This one comes from Julie Fader from TAS in Toronto. Julie asks, in response to call to action 92 and a growing commitment from corporate Canada to advance reconciliation, more and more companies are seeking to engage Indigenous peoples and work with Indigenous companies. However, resources appear to be strained. In our industry, for example, there aren't enough Indigenous architects and architecture firms to meet an increasing demand for Indigenous design and placekeeping. How can corporate Canada best support the growth of Indigenous businesses across all sectors?
Probably again, going back to what I talked about earlier, probably the most important thing is for corporate leaders to understand what they're trying to achieve. They need to understand the history, and they need to understand what the role of the corporation that they're party to, or the industry of which they are part of, what impact and what role that played in the damage that was done to Indigenous cultures, Indigenous resources, Indigenous properties, etc. And so being able to take on that responsibility and that sense of its own role in things is an important part of what we're trying to achieve. And a direction on reconciliation from corporate Canada. But corporate Canada also has an obligation not just to sign more contracts with more Indigenous societies or Indigenous groups and employing more Indigenous people. It's also about changing the culture of the corporate environment. So, and I'm not just talking about cultural context. I'm talking about the way that you think, the way that you do business, the way that you talk to and about each other, and particularly talking about Indigenous people and Indigenous resources. The resource industry has probably had the most negative impact on Indigenous societies when a part of corporate Canada. And it has an obligation to recognize that it's had that negative impact. And I haven't seen that it does yet. I've seen that it gives it passing reference in its work, but it doesn't really change the way it does business. It still continues to do what it was doing years ago, and they try to co-opt Indigenous leaders or Indigenous communities into what they're doing. So they don't change their direction. They just try to bring Indigenous people to work with them in their direction. And so that's not doing the right thing. And there will be Indigenous leaders and Indigenous people who go along with that because, as I talked about earlier, sometimes we bought into the pill. We bought into the story. And so we need to recognize as Indigenous people when we're losing our sense of direction by being co-opted in that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of just how you say that, reconciliation is a constant thing. It's a constant effort. It's we're always going to have to work hard to really kind of keep pushing reconciliation forward. And it just makes a lot of sense with what you're saying there about how we kind of just really need to keep rechecking in with our hearts and where we are. What are our motivations and what are we thinking right now? So we have another video question. This one comes from John from Nelson Education.
Hello, my name is John Estabila. I'm speaking to you today from the Nelson offices located in Toronto on lands covered by the Williams Treaties. Our question is, in your opinion, which of the calls, which has not yet been addressed, requires the most immediate action to significantly impact the education of students today and for future generations? Thank you.
When people ask me which is your favorite call to action, I keep saying it's like asking me which is my favorite child. I can't do that. But I will tell you this, that when you look at the TRC report, the first 25 calls to action are about those areas of Canadian society that we believed then and continue to believe now require immediate attention. And probably the most important of them was attacking the impact of Canadian society and the way it functions on vulnerable people who live on the streets, the homeless, who are living without resources, who are living in poverty. And we said that poverty and homelessness are the most significant issue for Indigenous people right now. And that needs to be addressed because it has the greatest impact on youth, on little children and youth, and about the way that society views Indigenous people too. When society drives down the streets and sees so many of our people homeless and just sitting on the sidewalks, they don't form a very good opinion about us. And so that lack of beneficial opinion has a very serious ongoing impact. So, and we could, of course, attack it by telling them, well, that's not the right view. Okay, so you need to correct your view. But the best way of attacking it is to change the way that vulnerable people are being assisted in addressing the problems that they face. So homelessness, poverty, lack of education, poor access to education, unemployment are major issues that I would say are the ones at the front of the list that need to and can be addressed in relatively quick order, and are not. And they're not because they're controversial for the conservative members of society, and they're also seen as being not in keeping with a sense that non-Indigenous people should be getting the same access. But what people forget is that the majority of homeless people, the majority of people living in poverty are Indigenous people, including incarceration. The majority of people who are going to jail are Indigenous people. And so something needs to be done to change that picture.
Yes, it's, growing up in various northern remote communities, I remember seeing those effects of homelessness, of poverty, of addiction. I remember in my class, I would see every single day at the same time this group of Indigenous people walking by my window, my school classroom window, and every day they were intoxicated. And I didn't really think about that until I got older, that those images and that story and that narrative, seeing that every day, I kind of internalized some of that. I took that perspective of Indigenous people and I incorporated that into me because I was so young when I saw it, and I saw it every day, and it just became a part of my identity too, and the way that I related to the world, going into post-secondary education and carrying that belief with me that makes me feel less than.
One common question that I get asked a lot by people in society, like in the Senate or in the judiciary or in universities, the one question they ask me a lot is, how come you are able to make it? How come you're doing so well? And those other Indigenous people are not. And to me, when we can reach a point in our existence where nobody will think to ask me that question, that question is never going to be a question that needs to be asked, then I think that we've made some really good progress. Because there's really no good answer for that question, because it's about the way that Indigenous people have been treated over the years. It's not about my success at overcoming it. It's about the fact that there are so many people, Indigenous people out there, who didn't have the opportunity and the perseverance that I had.
So I had another question. I am on my way to becoming a teacher. I was inspired by my mother, who's a teacher, and various educators that have been in my life that have really, for no other way to put it, they just took a chance on me. They really decided to get to know me and connect with me, which has been incredible. I think that has been one of the biggest reasons where I have been successful in some ways in education. I'm still getting my degree, but I remember in school, I went when I was 18. I left from about a community of 300 people, Pick Lake, to Toronto, and it was a big culture shock. To never seeing the stars, and just everything's always moving, and I couldn't breathe the fresh air anymore. I remember I made a fire for a student on campus for his project, and as soon as the smoke hit me, it was like a wall of bricks. It was just like, okay, I think you need to go home, or you need to reconnect with home however you can while speaking with your family or whatnot. But in speaking with other students, there always seems to be this, not always, but I have heard familiar stories of young Indigenous people going to post-secondary, leaving because it's either too difficult or family or just any number of problems. But then they find themselves in their communities, right? They go back home and they find out what their purpose is, their drive, and then they come back and then they succeed. And that's where I think I am, and that's where a couple of my friends are. And every time I heard a friend tell that story, I was like, wow, that's my story. I didn't know that was your story too. So my question would be, what do you think we can do for Indigenous students to permit them to find themselves in post-secondary education? Or maybe is that something we need to do before?
Well, no. Education is a constant thing, even now in my later years of life, I'm still learning. And I love learning. I love to learn things and figure things out. And so learning is not something that you ever stop doing. And so even when you leave the university and go back home for a while, you're still learning something. You're learning something about yourself. You've learned something about the urban environment or the urban place that you were at, and now you're trying to figure out how to make that work better for you. I'm like you. I went to university for a while, and then I left and went back home and lived with my grandmother and took care of her for a while. And she's the one who told me that it's time for me to go back. Because she reminded me that I had work to do, and so just as an aside, she had wanted me to be a priest when I was younger, but I wanted to go to university, and so when I decided to go to university, and she reluctantly agreed to that. She wanted me to go to a seminary, but she reluctantly agreed to my going to university. She said, if you're going to go to university, you get it done, and then you remember that your obligation is to use that knowledge to help others. And so that's always what I try to do. And even today, she's been long gone for almost 60 years. And when I have a decision to make, I ask myself, what would she think about this, about what I'm about to do, about what I want to do? And that guides me. So I understand your point about the role of our teachers in life. And so you need to fulfill that role as well as you're working towards your final degree, because you have young people who are looking up to you. They want to know from you, based on your experience, what's it like? What's it like being in university? Tell me about it. And so you tell them about it. So make that effort to let them know. And when you're finished your life as a teacher and you're going into retirement, you're still going to use that knowledge, So I think that you need to be aware that we never stop learning and we never stop educating.
Wow, that's an incredible, powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. I know that, when I left university for the first time, I carried this shame for a bit and this stigma of failure. So I think, hearing your story and how it's so familiar to us, I think can inspire students who maybe are struggling right now with their education, their journey, and you know, you kind of shifted my thinking of like, okay, everything is education. No time is wasted. You know, that time home, the time connecting, the time resting, all of that is important. So thank you for sharing that. And I really hope some students out there today can hear your story and just feel inspired to keep going. So our final question comes from Kelsey Noakes at IG Wealth Management in Winnipeg. She asks, what are the small actionable steps that individuals can take to positively contribute to reconciliation?
Oh, small actionable steps. I mean, that's a pretty definitive question that requires a pretty definitive answer, and I think that's what she's looking for. It's a little hard to say what each individual can do or should do in a particular situation. You know, I would say that it goes back to the broader questions and broader answers that I talked about earlier, which is making yourself self-aware. You know, I would say when I do my public speaking and public engagements, I have a crowd of adults, usually grandmothers and grandfathers, as well as parents, and I speak to them and I say, the one thing that you need to understand is that you're going to have an audience at home of your own children and grandchildren. And so if you want to make a significant contribution to reconciliation, improve their sense of self-respect and improve their sense of respect towards Indigenous people and towards themselves, so that they understand. You know, I had a teacher tell me one time that every day he, at the dinner table, he would ask his 10-year-old son, "What did you learn at school today?" And that day they happened to talk a bit about residential school. And the little boy, 10 years old, said to his father, "Daddy, we learned all about the residential school, and we learned about the young children, sometimes younger than me," he said, "who were taken away from their parents and put in that place." And then the boy was sitting there quietly for a while, and Dad could see that he was thinking and he was still got something to say. And he looked up at his dad and he had tears in his eyes. And the little boy said, "Daddy, I want you to promise me that you'll never let them do that to me." And to me, that was a powerful story about the role that parents can play, because at that point in time, that father had an opportunity to reinforce his relationship with his son, but more importantly, to help him understand that there were many children out there who did not benefit from the kind of relationship that they have together, and that he should understand that, and he should try to do what he can as he's growing up to work with that, to understand that, and to use it in the work that he ultimately chose as an adult.
Wow. So yeah, context is important. Of, you know, are you a father? Are you a teacher? You know, understanding where you are and where you're starting from, where your feet are right now, to understand what actionable steps can I take in my day, in my relationships that I have. That's it's incredible. It kind of brings up the memories of I think I read that when you were researching the TRCs throughout the world, you found out that there was over 60 TRCs in different countries, and they all defined reconciliation slightly different. It was based on their context and their history and their own experiences, right? So that kind of reflects the sort of individual kind of context that we need to be aware of. We need to understand what our histories are, what our relationships are, what our roles are within the people around us.
And it also was often limited. role of the truth and reconciliation process in particular countries was often limited by the fact that they were established by government solely for the purpose of convincing the people that everything was okay. So it was to continue the lies about truth and to say, we'll have true reconciliation if you guys just do what we tell you. You guys just accept what we've told you. And so we pointed that out, that there are some truth and reconciliation commissions out there that have been impacted by the fact that they're controlled by government. And truth and reconciliation commissions that are not controlled by government, once they're established, are the true commissions, or the ones that we need to understand are important.
So I could ask you questions all day, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have. Thank you, Senator Sinclair, for joining us today. And a special thank you to everyone who submitted questions for today's DWF Live. Miigwech for joining us, and have a great day.